Hey, welcome back to the stash. You know, everyone's got their own pick for Spider-Man's golden age. Some say the 60s, the birth of the character, Stan and Steve laying the foundation, and others swear by the 90s. You got Maximum Carnage, the animated series. But in my case, there's one decade that truly captivated me. One decade that stood out from the rest. The 1980s. Because, for me, the 1980s wasn't just Spider-Man's greatest decade, it was when he became my Spider-Man. This was the era where he fought the biggest and baddest villains with nothing but grit and determination. Where gang wars spilled into the street. Where he wore a living costume that bonded to him. Where he stood at the altar wondering if the mask could make space for a ring. So today I'm going to talk all about why the 80s to me was the most complete era in Spider-Man's history. And I know that to talk about everything this era had, then this video would have to go on for hours and hours. So I wanted to go over some moments that personally stuck out to me, from Juggernaut to Hobgoblin, from weddings to funerals, from an iconic bold new look to the unbeatable classics. Before we get into that though, I want to take a quick second to say that here at The Stash we're trying to reach 15,000 subscribers before the end of the month. It's a huge ask, I know, but with your help I also know we can do it. So if you like Spider-Man or just comic content in general, feel free to stick around and maybe hit that subscribe button. But anyway, with all that being said, this is the decade that defined the Amazing Spider-Man. Every era gives you something. The 60s gave us the blueprint, the 70s gave the story a sense of maturity, but the 80s perfected the balance of deep, emotional storytelling with big, memorable hooks that still get talked about today. It's the decade that gave us classics that you can still hand to a new reader and say, this is why Spider-Man matters. It's well and truly got it all, and during a time where Marvel was completely at their best, I'm talking about every single title was astoundingly good, it makes it all the more impressive with how much this era stood out from the rest. But let's start with a story that came pretty early on within its time. It's of course, Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut. It's simply 2 issues. The Amazing Spider-Man issue 229 and 230, where Spider-Man faces a villain he has absolutely no business beating. Kane Marco is unstoppable. That's not a nickname, that's literally his power. And here's Peter Parker, completely out of his depth. It's just him, New York City, and a giant in a helmet walking through buildings, and Spidey tries everything, but nothing works. I mean, how could anything work against one such as the Juggernaut? His webbing snap, his plans constantly foiled, and still he keeps going. But Peter doesn't quit. He doesn't care that Juggernaut's out of his weight class, he just refuses to lose. And that simple yet crucial element is what makes this story timeless. It's not about facing the question of can he win, but more so it's about how he will never stop trying. And if you ever need to explain Spider-Man to someone in 10 minutes, a great, more overlooked story to give them is easily these 2 issues. But if the 80s had a mascot, it would have to be the Hobgoblin. Emerging from the 80s, he was one of the staples of the time, and within a short amount of issues, he was able to properly form his own legacy. One that, yes, will always be linked to the Green Goblin, but at the same time just feels uniquely his. Hobgoblin was a true pillar for the decade, and my god, his stories was just so unbelievably good. From his first appearance in The Amazing Spider-Man issue 238, he felt like the Goblin myth reborn, but with a mystery behind the mask that was better than the one of the original. Who was the Hobgoblin? For a time, that question kinda defined the overarching tension of his stories. The mystery was carried through each and every page, and it left you wanting more. This was slow burn storytelling at its best. Years of misdirection, suspects, and underworld dealings mixed with just action that you could only get with a pair like these two. And it wasn't just the Hobgoblin himself. It was the ripple effect. The Daily Bugle newsroom turned into a conspiracy board. The Rose entered the scene, moving pieces just like his father. And Spider-Man, he was caught deep in the middle of it, just trying to make sense of it all while trying to stop this maniac. His friends and family got caught in the crossfire. He was pushed to his absolute limits, and as a result, we got one of the greatest sagas in the character's history. I mean, these two were heavy hitters. Their battles were incredibly intense, and to match is some of my personal favorite Spidey covers ever. And as a result of this iconic creation, we soon after got the legendary Gang War event. It's a story that wholeheartedly gave us a Spider-Man who was deeply connected to the streets of New York City, and Daredevil in a fat suit too. Within the center of it all though, is one of my favorite Spider-Man villains ever. The Rose. He's the son of Wilson Fisk, the Kingpin, and like his dad, he's calm, calculating, and terrifying. I love the way the story gives him such immense depth and how it displays crime as a family business and even a generational curse. When the gangs of New York erupt in an all-out war in Amazing Spider-Man issues 284 to 288, it's complete chaos in its most unfiltered form, and all Spider-Man can do is try to hold back a tidal wave of this insidious crime wave with his bare hands. But how could we ever forget about Sin Eater? The Death of Jean DeWolff isn't just one of the best Spider-Man stories of the 80s, it's one of the rawest, most unsettling stories Marvel's ever published, ever. Running through Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man issues 107 to 110, it starts with something unthinkable. Jean DeWolff, captain of the NYPD and one of Spidey's few allies in uniform, is murdered. It was just a simple gunshot and she's gone. The killer calls himself the Sin Eater, a man on a self-appointed mission to cleanse the city by executing those he sees as corrupt or immoral. But through it all, he's just a man with a shotgun and the conviction that he's right. And that's what makes him terrifying. For Spider-Man, this is all about hunting down a killer before he strikes again, while trying not to lose himself in the process. For Daredevil, who joins the hunt, it's about stopping Peter before his rage crosses a line he can't uncross, because Spider-Man is properly angry here. Angrier than we're used to seeing him. The panels are full of clenched fists, gritted teeth, and moments where you wonder, if Matt Murdock wasn't there, what would Peter have done? And when Sin Eater is finally unmasked, the truth makes the story hit even harder. It was Stan Carter all along, a man who was helping Spidey with the case, a former S.H.I.E.L.D. agent and partner on the force for Jean DeWolff. This story was a masterpiece written by the late Peter David. It's the 80s at their boldest, street level, personal, and willing to push Spider-Man right up to the edge of who he is, just to see if he can pull himself back. Now, if the Juggernaut story is pure determination and the Hobgoblin saga is pure paranoia, then the kid who collects Spider-Man is pure soul. It's a little backup story in the Amazing Spider-Man issue 248, and it's one of the most beautiful, heartbreaking things Marvel's ever printed. Peter visits a young boy who adores Spider-Man. He sits with him. He tells him his origin. He looks through his collection, and then, in one of the most painfully human moments of the decade, Spidey pulls off the mask. Not for drama, but just for kindness. The kid's name is Timmy, and by the last page, you understand why Spider-Man came to see him. After that, you put the book down. You breathe and you remember. Sometimes, it's the small moments that matter the most. Then, as everything eventually does, Spider-Man changes. This time with a bold new look. The Amazing Spider-Man issue 252 debuted the iconic black suit for the world to see. It's sleek, it's sharp, it's a costume that looks like it means business, and at first, it's just a cool new look. But the more time passes, the stranger it feels. I mean, we already learned from Secret Wars issue 8 that came just a bit after ASM 252 that the suit originated from Battleworld, and now the suit doesn't even want to come off. Hell, it even takes his unconscious body for joyrides, because the suit, as I'm sure you're all familiar with by now, is a living alien organism, a symbiote. And when Peter finally rejects it, Web of Spider-Man issue 1 turns that separation into one of the greatest moments of the 80s. In a church tower with the bells tolling, Peter rips the suit from his body as it screams in silence. The symbiote is forced off its perfect host. On its homeworld, the symbiote is an emotionless being who preys on emotionless others. However, fate has paired it with an emotional being who feels intensely from fear, greed, excitement, responsibility, and love. But symbiosis is a two-way street. The alien costume is intelligent, therefore it has learned to feel, and in feeling, to act. It saved Peter that day, no doubt leaving him to wonder why. It's a question that will haunt our hero for the rest of his life. But that wasn't the end for the symbiote. Eventually, it found a new host, one that despised the very same man who rejected it, and when they bonded, the world would meet Venom. Venom was a part of the big issue 300 milestone for the Amazing Spider-Man. It was his first full appearance, and even through just his cameos alone, readers knew this monster was about to change the books forever. He was the dark mirror of Spider-Man, stronger, faster, and impossible to sense with a spider sense. I adore how early on he was just this kind of weird stalker for our hero, and it was always chilling to see how he would try to get involved within Peter's life. And when he first battles the wall crawler, you kind of feel hopeless in just how powerful Venom is. He's literally pure chaos, an enemy who could be anywhere, anyone, and strike without warning. In many ways, it was the perfect story for the giant milestone. A villain born entirely from Spider-Man's own history, his own choices, his own mistakes, and in the 80s, enemies could rise from the darkest corners of Peter's past. Venom was one of them, and once he appeared, Spider-Man's world would never truly feel safe again. Now, we would never ever forget the wedding of the decade, the wedding of Peter Parker and Mary Jane Watson. In the Amazing Spider-Man Annual Issue 21, comics' favorite couple finally tied the knot. This was years of character growth for both of them paying off. Mary Jane, the party girl who once ran from responsibility, now stands at the altar, fully knowing who Peter is and what loving him will cost. Peter Parker, the man who once thought his life as Spider-Man left no room for love, now stands next to the true love of his life, ready to begin a brand new chapter. It's hopeful, it's beautiful, and it's one of the last truly big status quo changes before comics started hitting the reset button every other year. Not to mention, because of this, we got one of the best graphic novels ever from Marvel, Spider-Man Parallel Lives. But then, the tone shifts, all thanks to the masterful story, Kraven's Last Hunt. 6 issues, all across the 3 Spider-Man titles in the 80s. Kraven the Hunter shoots Spider-Man, buries him alive, and then wears the mask himself, determined to prove he's better. What follows is a hauntingly dark and claustrophobic tale. It's not the usual cat and mouse game, but rather a true descent into obsession. Kraven hunts criminals with brutal precision, all to show he can be a better Spider-Man. But here's what he doesn't understand. Being Spider-Man isn't about winning or being brutal in your methods, it's about enduring, about being a hero. And when Peter claws his way out of that grave, it's a statement for the ages, a resurrection that no Spidey fan will ever forget, and a perfect reminder that you can bury the man, but you can't bury the symbol. For Kraven though, it's the end of his mission, the end of his hunt, and in his mind, he's proven his point. There's nothing left for him to hunt, for he's finally bested his one true rival, and so, with quiet finality, Kraven takes his own life. A gun, a single shot, and a character-defining exit that left a shadow over Spider-Man's world for time to come. This decade also gave space for side characters to shine, and none more than Felicia Hardy. In Spectacular Spider-Man, I always saw the Black Cat as a mirror in a sense. She loves the thrill of Spider-Man, but not the reality of Peter Parker. And Peter learns the hard way that loving the idea of someone isn't the same as loving who they actually are. Their relationship during that time is messy, passionate, and deeply human. It forces Peter to figure out the difference between escape and home. Their story to me was a staple of the Spectacular Spider-Man series during this era, one that defined a lot of stories within that comic. And that's not all, because around the same time, that very same series was also about expanding the neighborhood, and with that came one of my favorite creations of the era, Cloak and Dagger. They first show up in Spectacular Spider-Man issue 64. Runaways turn vigilantes waging war on drugs and corruption. They bring a street-level, moral edge to Spider-Man's world that feels right at home. Dark alleyways, bright light cutting through shadows, perfect comic book energy. And their start here perfectly set up their return in Spidey books during the insane Maximum Carnage saga. And then, Web of Spider-Man gave us Tombstone, a cold-blooded killer tied to Robbie Robertson's past. His stories, I feel, are highly underrated, especially his time in the spectacular Spider-Man comics. I adore how it's pure crime drama and the way it properly gives Robbie a chance to have the spotlight. I honestly just wish we got to see more of this Tombstone in adaptions. These stories are honestly great, they're some of my favorites from the time, and I'd recommend them to anyone to read. But near the end of the decade, Spider-Man comics enter the Todd McFarlane era. McFarlane shows up and changes how Spider-Man looks forever. The dynamic poses, the spaghetti webbing, the big eyes, Venom's definitive design, he created his own style, one that instantly captured the attention of its readers. And with David Michelinie writing, McFarlane's art made Spider-Man feel more alive on the page, and it closed out the decade with a style that would define the character for years to come. So why is the 80s the best decade for Spidey? Because it hit every note a Spider-Man story can play, and it played them all in perfect harmony. It gave us heroic endurance in Nothing Can Stop the Juggernaut, the blueprint for what it means when Peter Parker refuses to quit. It gave us mystery and noir in The Long Game of the Hobgoblin, the shadowy elegance of the Rose, and the brutal street-level chaos of gang war. It gave us pure heart in The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, a story that proves Peter Parker's greatest power has always been empathy. It gave us iconic moments, the all-new, all-different costume, and McFarlane reshaping the very way Spider-Man moved on the page. It gave us psychological depth in Kraven's Last Hunt, a haunting masterpiece about obsession, morality, and identity. It gave us neighborhood depth through the light and shadow morality of Cloak and Dagger, the dangerous yet alluring Black Cat, the cold whisper of Tombstone in the alleyways, and the stalking presence of Venom. It gave us romance and commitment with Peter and MJ's wedding. Not a tease, not a what if, but a genuine promise in front of the world. And it didn't stop there. The 80s were the decade that saw Spider-Man's supporting cast come alive. Robbie Robertson standing up to his past, J. Jonah Jameson wrestling with his conscience, Harry Osborn walking the fragile line between friend and foe. It was the decade where the Daily Bugle was a character and the heartbeat of the city. The decade that expanded his rogues gallery while deepening the ones we thought we already knew, where Spectacular Spider-Man and Web of Spider-Man could tell entirely different kinds of stories from Amazing, and yet all three still felt like Spider-Man. It wasn't one creator, one title, or one single run carrying the decade. It was a chorus of voices, all playing the same song, one that's all about how Spider-Man is at his best when he's at his most human. The 80s taught Peter Parker how to fall, and they taught him how to rise. Not because he never lost, he lost plenty, but because in those moments where he did win, you knew exactly what it cost him, and why he'd pay it again without hesitation. That's why the 1980s wasn't just the best decade for Spider-Man, it was the decade that defined him.